Hi, I'm Othais, and this is not a deja vu scenario. This is actually a separate episode on the Mauser self-loading pistol construction 1896 as optimized for Germany during the war, earning it the nickname the Red 9. Let's go ahead and get it over the light box. Still 11 3/4 inches long, we've now reduced the weight down to just 2.45 pounds. Must be those lightning cuts in the new hammer. 10 rounds, staggered box magazine, stripper clip loading, you know the deal, except for one big difference. We're now chambering the 9mm Parabellum cartridge.
Good afternoon all. If you're enjoying this video so far, please don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe to our channel. If you want to directly support the making of the series, please consider joining us on Patreon, Subscribestar, or Utreon. Or you can pick yourself up a poster or shirt from our shop at C&Rsenal.com/shop. Thank you all.
Last episode, we covered the Mauser C96 pistol from its theoretical conception until the completion of the Italian naval contract. Ooh. That, of course, resulted in the slab-side Modelle of 1899. We further followed this pistol through its service into World War I and its post-war disposition. However, starting with the Italian contract, we abandoned the core story of the evolving C96. Today, we'll be rectifying that by tracing from 1899 until just after the end of the war. From the very first prototypes, Paul Mauser had set his sights on German army adoption of his automatic pistol, which meant getting it into officials' hands early and often in order to gather feedback and make inroads towards his goals. Letters actually reveal that army officers were being shown the pistol, albeit outside of proper trials, as early as March of 1896. It's worth mentioning that at this time, there was some consideration towards a 6mm bullet, as the Germans were also experimenting with a 6mm rifle cartridge. Sharing a bore meant the possibility of being able to make use of failed rifle barrels. Neither 6mm was actually adopted though. The first official demonstration appears in the diary of Master Gunsmith August Kaiser. He reports that Lieutenant General von der Plantz, Oberst von Kirchbach, and a Rittmeister, that's a riding master, Graf Blitzholm, came to see the pistol demonstrated by Mauser himself, and that they were apparently quite astonished at the firepower. In July of 1896, Mauser would travel to Spandau, presenting his pistols to the Gewehrprüfungskommission. He brought along a 6-shot, 10-shot, and 20-shot example. I'm unsure if a carbine was present at this time. Do recall he had designed this model in particular to interest the cavalry. Regardless, he displayed his new products in detail, demonstrated their firing, and left examples for their further examination. In another demonstration in August, Mauser would fire 1,000 rounds for the assembled generals, including the Württemberg Minister of War, who was deeply impressed and apparently declared that the carbine question would be solved with this weapon. Riding this praise, Mauser reached for the very top and managed to arrange a demonstration for the Kaiser himself. This was set for August 20th, and William II was suitably impressed, even graciously overlooking a bit of a faux pas. Mauser had personally presented both the pistol and carbine versions of his new gun. Fidel Federli was also present, who had remained the claimed originator of the C96 design, but we covered that bit of confusion last time. Also present was a Mauser employee, Hermann Wedler, who was their designated marksman for this display. Having demonstrated the pistol and the carbine at 200 meters, he was happy to hear that the Kaiser himself had actually wished to try both. However, when it came time to shoot the carbine in particular, Wedler noticed that the Kaiser had not picked up on the odd ergonomics of the pistol carbine, and he helpfully took the left hand of Wilhelm and pressed it firmly into the appropriate place on the gun. Unfortunately, Wilhelm II suffered from a birth defect that left him with a stunted left arm as an adult. The exact condition is still debated at times, however, this was, at that time, a point of embarrassment. Still, the Kaiser took his shots, and every round hit home at 200 meters distance. He thanked Wedler for correcting his grip, a certain mercy for the poor man, and then he turned to Paul Mauser and was instantly curious if the action could be adapted to a rifle cartridge. This moment would prove to be very defining for Paul Mauser, having to tell the Kaiser no, that the action was not strong enough. He'd spent the rest of his life chasing a reliable auto-loading rifle for German service. We'll try to talk about his attempts some other day, just know that he was limited by the patents of others and the odd restrictions of the German army. The two guns used by the Kaiser in this demonstration, by the way, were brought back to Oberndorf and clearly engraved to mark the occasion. Now, while all these demonstrations and investigations are going on, an internal conflict would break out, but to tell it requires a bit of background. Recall the arms company Ludwig Lowe, conveniently founded by a man of the same name. If that seems familiar to you, then you might have watched our episode on the Ottoman 1887. In trying to leverage funds for the production of this, his first truly large and independent contract, Paul Mauser had borrowed heavily from the bank and relied on Ludwig Lowe, the company, as a partner in the deal. In actuality, the main partner was Isidor Lowe, Ludwig's brother who took over the company when he unexpectedly died in September of 1886. Since the contract with the Ottomans was begun, Isidor saw an opportunity at monopolizing German arms production, and quietly bought out the bank which held the majority of Mauser's company stock. A hostile takeover, one that Mauser was not consulted on. He would spend the rest of his life as an employee of his own namesake company instead of being its owner. Well, during the early 1890s, Lowe, the company, was caught in an anti-Semitic scandal. Difficulties with the new Gewehr 1888 magazine rifles led to accusations that Lowe was sabotaging the German army, among other claims. While the chief accuser would end up jailed, the market was already somewhat poisoned. So Lowe reorganized the company, putting all the arms and ammunition makers under one banner, that of Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken, DWM. Alright, you keeping up with this? Because I got one more person to introduce. In 1891, Italy was wavering on the Mannlicher rifle. In hindsight, we know they would ultimately commit to the hybrid of the Mannlicher with their own native design by Salvatore Carcano. However, this was not necessarily a foregone conclusion at the start of the same year, so Lowe hired a former Austro-Hungarian officer and shooting instructor who was conveniently fluent in Italian to help sell their Mauser rifle, Georg Luger, who certainly has a history all his own. But for our purposes, we just need to point out, it appears Paul Mauser's first true consideration of Georg Luger came when the latter sued the former for his own design. This guy right here, the third lug on a Mauser rifle, the safety lug, which Fideli later in court swore was on Mauser test models in the 1880s and was present on sample rifles sent from Obendorf to DWM, a feature that Luger swears he developed all on his own and totally never saw at DWM in Mauser samples, which he was there at the same time as, until after he patented that feature in 1894. The resulting lawsuit would drag on until April of 1898, at which point the matter went to court, and despite all the evidence of Mauser's prior invention, which seemed to be quite true, German patent law had to do with sales into Germany itself, and all of Mauser's third lug guns built before Luger's patent were sold as samples overseas. Whoa. So Mauser ended up having to pay Luger, and at this point Isidor Lowe had to step in to settle the matter. He negotiated a lump sum payment to avoid the kettle from completely boiling over. Mauser, in the meantime, had learned a lesson from Luger, which is why his patent for the C96 pistol, registered back in 1895, just a year after Luger's handiwork, well, Mauser put his name on it instead of the company's. In October of 1896, Lowe would discover the problem and interrupted Mauser's vacation along the Riviera, one that he had done actually to recover from a lung disease of some sort, with a registered letter demanding he turn the patent over to the company. Paul Mauser would actually let this matter sit until January and then began a series of negotiations that were ultimately resolved in March of 1897, one in which Mauser summarily beat Lowe over the head. Waffenfabrik Mauser would be converted from a limited partnership to a stock company. Paul Mauser would be appointed the personally liable partner on the board and was immediately established as chairman of Mauser Work, taking the place of Isidor Lowe. His pay was increased and a percentage share of sales arranged for his descendants. In the event of any increase in capital stock, Mauser must be given an option on at least 20% of that increase. Specific to the C96, all German production must happen at Obendorf. Licenses may not be granted without his consent. Price and distribution of the pistol were under his control, and should net at least 25% net profit. And for all this, he turned over the patent to Waffenfabrik Mauser. This little pistol, regardless of its origins, gave a lot of pride and power back to Paul Mauser, that's for sure. However, we may see this negotiation ultimately sabotage the future of the C96. Now, returning to German trials, 145 pistols of the 10-shot variety were manufactured for German investigation and sent to the GPK in February of 1898. Proper trials began later on in June, and an interim report was available in late December. Compared to the Reichsrevolver, the C96 was higher capacity, faster firing, faster loading. It was more accurate, longer ranged, and had better penetration. Curiously, the C96 was said to be in no way less robust than the Reichsrevolver, which is frankly surprising. There were some criticisms though. The C96 was found to be prone to occasional jams, though they were easy to clear. And several double shots had been noted, a failure of the disconnector. One last complaint was weight, but considering the Reichsrevolver, thanks to that intermittent jamming and double taps, the trials continued now with 305 additional pistols, and then another 148 in March of 1899. This is probably about the time that Mauser decided to make a minor change, however I've had a hard time locking down the date of its addition. Here is our earlier 1899 Italian, which you notice has a solid base to the bottom of this sort of lock assembly. Whereas this later pre-war commercial model has, well, a tab sticking through. Now this finger is actually an extension that is part of this plunger here on this gun. And you may recall from last time's animation, this plunger wraps around this tipping claw, which then serves to bias the lock. In this case, this added extension means that whenever the lock recoils and therefore compresses the plunger and rotates this, well, technically the hook gets rotated, which then compresses the plunger. Well, that compressed plunger then definitely makes contact with our transfer bar / slip-off disconnector. So, in this earlier assembly, the trigger just lifts and then slips off, whereas in this later assembly, the trigger doesn't slip off so much as this little finger positively pushes this guy back, making sure that it absolutely goes behind the trigger and for surely disconnects the action. Now we can see the change by just manipulating one of these guns, well, both of these guns assembled. So I have the old slab side large ring hammer, I cock the hammer back, and then I hold the hammer back and pull the trigger. Hear that click? That's the disconnect. So if I let go, right, hold it back, click, let go. Yeah, it's not dropping. Now I have to catch the hammer. If I want to ease this hammer down, like we talked about in our last episode, I have to catch it. And that's a little bit of a scary bother. You get good at it, but it's not natural. On this guy, I'm gonna cock that hammer back. He has the new disconnect, which means I can hold this hammer back pretty far, and then no click. And if I let go of the hammer, yeah, it's coming on forward. Sorry, I'm in my own path, but you guys get the idea. That thing is free to drop as long as I'm holding the trigger. And when I let go, she locks back. If I hold her back, pull the trigger, yeah, she's dropping. And you can hear there's no sound of disconnecting happen because it doesn't happen until this recoils. It's a recoil-driven disconnect instead of a slip-off. With very few changes overall, it was looking pretty good for the Mauser pistol, and it would continue to trickle on that way until 1900 or so, which is when disaster struck. The Swiss adopted their own automatic pistol, and it carried a familiar name, Luger. You see, the Borchardt C93 was being marketed by DWM. Until now, it wasn't a problem for Mauser, as the C96 was superior, and despite repeated failures in trials around the world, Hugo Borchardt was in no mood to significantly refine its design. So Georg Luger would head its refinement, and he achieved dramatic results, especially in simplifying and shrinking the lockwork. In the end, it was elegant, neutral, balanced, used a detachable magazine, and was exceedingly simple to wield one-handed. The Borchardt Luger would win the Swiss trials, and it now invaded the German. In keeping the C96 pistol to himself, Mauser had incentivized Isidor Loewe to bank on a dark horse. The only thing that kept the Mauser in the running from here on was its superior cartridge. Georg Luger would not chamber his pistol for 7.63 Mauser, saying it would unbalance the gun and make it too heavy. In the meantime, Mauser would go even bigger with the 9mm export cartridge targeted at foreign powers that were distrustful of small bore pistols. The origin of this cartridge is just like the 9mm Parabellum. Opening up the original 30 caliber, the result was a powerhouse that saw few sales. It's interesting to note the cartridge would reappear later as a round for submachine guns in Austria. From 1902 on, there was really no hope for the C96 in German trials, so much so that Paul Mauser would adapt some of his automatic rifle research into another pistol design, but that's another story for another day. The German government still plodded along in its decision, but ultimately, the Luger we know would prevail. First with the Navy in 1906, and then the Army's P08. Alright, so Germany was not going to bite, but the C96 actually remains probably one of the most common early automatic pistols in the collector's market, so where the heck did they all come from? Well, Siam bought them in various lots, starting with the earlier cone hammer pattern. We've already discussed that the Ottoman Empire took in 1,000, the Italian had their contract for 5,000, but the broad majority of pre-World War I pistols were sold into the private market. It's worth noting a young Winston Churchill was among the early buyers, carrying a C96 through the Sudan and South Africa. Commercial sales were actually exceedingly good throughout the Boer War, where the C96 proved to be a popular sidearm. I'm not gonna lie, I can't imagine much better for long-range pistol shooting at the turn of the century. Thanks to the Italian contract, the commercial models temporarily took on that flat-sided frame, but the milled panels, designed to lighten it up just a little bit, soon returned. At first they were very shallow, and then back to their full depth. It also picked up a bit of a billboard marking on the side, making it very clear where you could get your own. Now, following the Boer War, sales began to slump, so the C96 received some improvements. First up was the safety. The original worked well enough, but its short travel meant it wasn't always obvious whether it was on or off, so the sweep was increased dramatically. Interestingly, the safe and fire positions were also reversed. Around the same time in 1902, a much more complicated option was trialed. This hammer joint system was designed to manipulate the hammer along with the safety. Complicated and dubiously helpful, no one liked this. Around serial number 35,000, estimated to be near 1903, the C96 hammer would be shrunk down. The new small ring hammer doesn't block the rear sight when the hammer is down, sitting lower with a smaller thumb pad. Likely this was felt to be easier to manipulate and more compact for holstering and drawing the pistol. Also around the same time as the new safety and hammer, the firing pin received a second securing lug. The barrel extension rail cover was extended further rearward and the extractor was lengthened. Now you might consider these the death throes of an aging design, but curiously, this is when Waffenfabrik Mauser finally settled in and committed to mass serial production and they focused on interchangeable parts, all around a single configuration. This finally standardized pattern is now known retroactively as the pre-war commercial series. 10 rounds, 7.63 Mauser, 5.5-inch barrel, tangent sights, no extras. This process begins in the serial range of the early 40,000s. This commitment to one design also bumped out the last vestiges of the lightened officer's model attempts, which by this point had evolved into what would later be nicknamed the Bolo model. These could be found in 6 or 10 shot versions and sported a shorter 3.9-inch barrel and had a narrower, more squared grip. The Bolo would reappear, however, post-war, so another story for another day. Commercial sales would remain the standard for the C96, with a handful of contracts being the exception. In 1912, Iran, known as Persia internationally at the time, would reach out to purchase 1,000 pistols. This grew to 1,100 by 1913, when the contract was actually finally penned out and signed. It appears that at least 500 were never delivered due to the start of the war. Instead, they were pulled into German inventory. Also back in 1913, the single largest contract to date was signed for the C96. 50,000 pistols. Mexico had actually tried standardizing on the Colt 1902, but after the rise of President Victoriano Huerta, the relationship between the US and Mexico soured. So his government sought out Mauser and the C96, signing a deal for the 50,000 pistols, although the deposit paid was only for 10,000 at first, which isn't a great start, but at least it's double the Italian contract, the largest by far even then. While this shaky endeavor was underway, Paul Mauser would actually pass away on May 29th of 1914. The cause of death was a lingering illness, which ultimately triggered heart failure. His nephew, Paul Mauser II, would take his place on the board of directors. Sadly, Mauser never realized his ideal rifle, and even managed to lose vision in his left eye, his dominant eye, and nearly lost an index finger when a prototype failed him back in 1902. Despite his passing, we'll see his pistol still had a long service life ahead, although not in Mexico. In July of 1914, Huerta would resign, and the Mexican government pulled out of the agreement, with none of the pistols yet shipped. Now, apparently Waffenfabrik Mauser would end up suing to try to recoup more of the overhead costs beyond the deposit, but I'm unsure how that case went, probably not too well. It wouldn't matter much though, because those stockpiles of C96s would soon come in handy. It's also interesting to note that in spring of 1914, the company had inquired in Berlin about the possibility of producing more rifles for the German government, but no orders were forthcoming, and it seems that Germany didn't know how severe the situation would soon become. Instead, Oberndorf would have to once more turn to the Ottoman Empire. In July, their arms commission would appear once more, looking for additional rifles, and this contract would actually be started but never fulfilled. And we all know in hindsight it's because war were declared. Waffenfabrik Mauser would be put to work on both rifles and pistols. However, the initial stages of the war had a pretty severe effect on their productivity. Many of their workmen immediately volunteered for army service. It got so bad that they had to request that the army administration please don't draft anyone from our ranks for the Landstrom, and in addition, many skilled workmen had to be recalled from the front to please just keep making guns for the other guys. New employees were hired wherever they could be found, and by 1916, Mauser employed 200 women, a first. By 1917, 1,500 women. At full capacity, Oberndorf would actually be able to crank out 1,500 pistols per week. That's one pistol per woman. It's estimated that by the end of 1914, however, at the beginning of all this, over 50,000 had already been completed. Now, World War I started pretty late in the year, so I'm betting the failed Mexican contract had a lot to do with that initial gross number. 1915 would see 85,000 completed, and 1916 rose to 95,000 completed. Most of these would be commercial sales, but military contracts would quickly follow. The Prussian War Ministry asked about available inventory pretty quickly after the war started. Mauser had 10,000 on hand and were asked for another 5,000 to boot. We'll see this number climb later. Württemberg requested 3,000. Austria-Hungary would also order 3,000 Mauser pistols in December of 1914. These were direct sale. Later, they would have to get them through the Prussian ministry. From 1915 to 1917, it appears they acquired just shy of 15,000 more. I'm unsure if there was any overlap with the initial Prussian order. Now again, the guns I'm discussing at this point are all standard pre-war production models, so they're therefore chambered for the 7.63 Mauser cartridge and sporting the second type safety, the one with the long throw. Well, that safety actually became a problem. If it's worn out or poorly fit, like in rapid production, you could switch the safety 98% off, but not quite click it home. Then, if you pulled the trigger, the hammer could be released by the seer and rest on the safety itself. Troops would attempt to fire the pistol, nothing would happen, and so they would check the safety. Touching it released the hammer, resulting in an unexpected discharge. Reports of accidental shootings and at least 2 fatalities came through the army. Waffenfabrik Mauser would devise a solution, and the War Ministry issued an order in November of 1915. All Mauser pistols from serial number 280,000 onward would be fitted with the new safety. Existing service pistols should be sent in for refitting, so earlier serials are common. All of the new safety guns would have a monogrammed NS symbol for new securing stamped on the back of their hammer. Interestingly, there is some evidence that Fidel Fideli had designed this new safety as far back as October of 1913, which may mean Mauser Oberndorf knew that there was a problem beforehand. Now, earlier you saw me use this exact pistol to demonstrate the second safety type because with the hammer down, it behaves exactly as it always did. However, with the hammer back, we can no longer engage the safety unless we put some tension on the hammer, and then with a separate hand, there we go, flicker up. Now what this does is it makes sure that we've pulled the hammer back behind the seer before engaging the safety. And if we try to pull her down, look at how far that thing falls because we've kept it way far away from the seer. All right, so when I release it, you'll watch it slap into the sear. Yeah, They really wanted to make sure that there was no way that you could have this on safe, pull the trigger, and have it get past the sear. Now, the safety wouldn't be the only change for the C96 during the war. Another request came through the ministry in, I believe, 1916. Recall, the standard pistol for the German army at the time was the Luger P08, which had been chambered for the 9mm parabellum cartridge. This was the blown-out version of the next 7.65 parabellum cartridge. Neither was as large or powerful as the C96's 7.63 Mauser, so Mauser pistols could easily be rechambered to use this 9mm parabellum ammunition, which is exactly what the War Ministry wanted, a much easier supply chain, and their wish was granted, but at a cost. The 7.63 Mauser pistols with stock had been priced at 62 marks. The 9mm parabellum versions were billed at 83 marks for the same, although I think the Army only paid 80 in the end. Waffenfabrik Mauser did not want that 9mm parabellum cartridge to remain the standard in the military sphere, let alone being expanded into the commercial sphere, that's for sure. I don't think they succeeded in the long run. 150,000 of these 9mm pistols would be ordered by the War Ministry, and like previous contracts, they were given their own serial block, 1 to 150,000. However, the contract was not completed, ending somewhere in the 140,000 range. I happen to have one of those German contract pieces right here, so we can finally get a closer look. All right, folks, a German wartime C96, and we know it is because of several key features. Number one, it's a C96. Number two, we have the milled panels appropriate to the period, and we have our small ring hammer, which actually is marked. We can see we have the little n, big S monogrammed new safety marking. So this is a two-handed style safety. Also, this gun, which is in the 76,000 block, is well within our 140 some odd thousand known to have been produced in their own unique serial group. Overhead, we can see we have the shorter style of extractor from the pre-war commercial Big Blocka series, and being chambered for 9mm, this correctly has a sight that goes from a little 50 here up to 500 there, 500 meters in total, half the distance of what would have been marked on the 7.63 versions. Takedown is the same as before, so I just went ahead and pulled out this firing pin so you can see coming from the Italian model with the single lug, we now have two lugs. And sort of a contoured surface. This provides a more symmetrical support for this firing pin when it's getting battered around in there. Now you'll find on these a German crown over U proof mark, and you may get lucky and see, say, like a Prussian eagle here or maybe under the trigger guard. You may even get some unit markings around the grip strap. This has none of the fancy extras. This is a bare bones Red 9 style of 9mm parabellum C96. And speaking of that, let's talk about these grips. Initially, the 9mm Mauser pistols had the usual plain serrated grips, same as commercial production. But because the only external difference between the 7.63 and 9mm models was to either double check how many, meters were written on the rear sight or be able to eyeball the difference in diameter of the muzzle itself, well, confusion started to become the standard, and there are actual reports from August of 1917 in which a division received 100 9mm pistols when they were meant to get the earlier 7.63. This could be disastrous, as it's kind of possible to get some ammunition swapping going on. And look, it's nowhere near ideal from a safety perspective or from a logistics perspective. So this red 9 marking would emerge as a solution to the problem of mixing up the two types of very similar pistol. Now, at first, it appears that this was an ad hoc solution. You'll get 9s with all sorts of weird sizes and shapes in a very narrow band of pistols. And then, in December of 1917, an order was made for not only the 9, but for it to be red and for it to be of a specific height, and this became very standardized. Now, red 9 grips are very often faked and are not indicative of a proper German-issued 9mm C96. You're going to want to really understand your serials, your rear sight, and other various markings before you just commit to buying one of these because you saw a red 9 on the grips. Now, realistically, none of these changes really require us to go into a whole other animation, so instead, let's go ahead and get it right into Mae's hands so that she can test fire the 9mm Parabellum C96 for us. You know, I'm not sure that I can feel a tremendous difference, although there's something more authoritative about the original cartridge to me. Okay, now, despite the introduction of the 9mm version, the 7.63 still saw significant sales. 1917 would see 39,000 or so made, which fell to only about 20,000 in the 1918 fiscal year. This reduction was likely due to the 9mm production stepping up, which seems to account for 65,000 that same year. Both Germany and Austria would field their C96 pistols fairly widely during the war. While I don't know of any specific tales, they remained a common sight, and certainly a striking one easily recognized in period photos. They were even apparently subject to some experimentation. This thing just makes the Villa Perosa look sensible. And on the topic of experimentals, Waffenfabrik Mauser would be approached by the Rifle Commission in 1917. This was likely all tied in with what would become the automatic pistol carbine program that ultimately resulted in the revolutionary MP-18, arguably the world's first proper submachine gun, and certainly the first to be produced and attemptedly fielded as such. The C96, however, was not easily adapted to fully automatic fire, as the excessive fire rate made the gun hard to control, tore up the action, and really only gave you a tiny burst of offensive energy. Instead, the old C96 hunting carbine was reworked into a semi-automatic trench rifle. Ultimately, this proved to be a poor mix of expensive and ineffective compared to the fully automatic tube gun. It also cannibalized pistol production that was otherwise necessary. Alright, that just about wraps up the C96 through World War I, and curiously, that's nowhere near the end of this pistol's service life. More changes would follow post-war, but they're significant enough that I feel like we'll need to go ahead and plan to do another episode someday. We can cover the model 1930, the return of the Bolo, and a fully automatic variation in the future. But for now, I'd like to just point out, you'd expect this frankly near obsolete pistol would have suffered under the post-war economic collapse and the disarmament treaties. However, in 1919, sales still held at 13,500, growing in 1920 and holding on in 1921. Part of this may have been the fact that Mauser Oberndorf began calling both the 7.63mm and 9mm versions of the pistol by the same name. Pistole 7.63, 7.63mm or 9mm. You'd be amazed at how often they forgot to put what was behind the comma when writing in their ledgers. Not like you can tell at a glance anyway. Now, there's also a whole mess of post-war police conversions to fix sights, new grips, or rechamberings. There are details that we are not going to be going into today, so, as always, take a look. It's in a book before you buy something that you don't understand. Okay, let's get Mae in here to talk about her experience with the wartime C96. Alright gang, we are back, and this time we have a little bit of the same, except it's more differenter.
Gasp!
Let me give that to you, because we are now talking about, as opposed to last time, the Mauser C96 as provided to Germany in wartime in 9mm parabellum.
So with wartime updates.
Yes. What do you see on those grips, Mae?
It appears to be the number 9, or is it a number 6?
It's definitely the number 9.
Okay.
And any clues on the color there?
That appears to be a deep red.
I wonder what this gun was nicknamed.
Deep red 9.
Now, there's 2 9s. It's the deep red 99.
Oh God.
Right.
Because there's 2 9s.
Right.
Ah, it's on both sides.
Right. Feeling better?
Yeah.
Okay. Other than that little difference, can you describe anything ergonomically that may have changed from the earlier Italian 1899 from our last episode?
Well, obviously there's a little bit of extra milling going on here.
Yes. Which may have worked because it is lighter.
I mean, it is definitely a little bit lighter. We did happen to notice that, and you didn't want me to weigh them at first. And it looks like the safety and the hammer, on appearance-wise, look different. Okay, I wonder if I can do the trick where I can just... Oh, hey!
Yes.
I can drop the hammer on this guy. Not bad.
So, number 1, is the hammer easier to cock for you?
Actually, let's see.
Somewhat.
Maybe not for me. Maybe not for me.
Scientific experiment time. Let's find out.
Scientific experiment time?
Here we have the long
This is science of the Othais.
Well, here. Which one's easier? Ready? Best effort.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, point, and then cock. You're not terrific at either.
I might just be equally terrible at my... I just totally did that.
Now, I'm no biologist, but I suspect you might have girl hands.
What? What is this science you keep talking of?
I think it's a little easier to hook the small ring, but I'm not really sure.
There's less ring for you to grab onto,
It does not block the sights either when you point it with the hammer down.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, okay.
Is it? Like, is that really a thing that you want?
No, I don't think it's necessary. I don't even know what the hell I would do.
Okay.
That would be beneficial,
So
but whatever.
You got a littler hammer. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's still valid.
It still has good stopping power.
Yeah.
Size doesn't matter.
It strikes the firing pin appropriately. Yeah. It's not no, because stopping power is totally different. Because you have a new cartridge.
Okay, yeah, but the safety. I did mention the safety was different as well. So on this guy, go ahead and get my hammer back. And then I can't just one-hand this safety on.
You can if the hammer's down.
Well, if the hammer's down. Okay, fine. Fine. Hammer's down. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, come on.
Okay, got it. That is a really long transition by comparison to the previous, the 1899. And then on top of that, it's sticking further out, which makes it more difficult.
Don't take it off. Leave it there.
Don't take it off. You want me to leave it on?
Put it in your holster.
Okay.
All right, draw. Okay.
That is not
scientific
fun.
test. This safety is off. That's reversed. So you
that
gotta
one
push.
is inherently easier.
No. You gotta take it from
I don't
me.
need
It's
to
a scientific.
I don't need to know a flower is a flower.
Draw the pistol.
Okay, fine. Draw the pistol.
Draw. Yeah,
That's way better.
Yeah, I agree. Now the problem is what they didn't like is the visual indication. It was very hard to tell whether you were on safe or fire because they're, tiny little difference
Yeah,
here.
no, that I can understand. So yeah, there is no guessing on this spot.
I feel
on
like
this
just
guy, I do know.
paint an arrow on the side of it.
Yeah, that would be way easier.
Anyway.
And then for this guy, I do know that with the hammer back, I can't just put the safety on. I have to two-hand it. So I have to pull the hammer back and put the safety on with my left hand.
Right, which is the new safety or the new securing.
Right.
Which is actually stamped on the back of the hammer. So you should be able to tell that your hammer has been modified as such. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about two-handed safety on?
I think two-handed safety use in general is just silly.
I don't think it's that bad.
It's not expected though. What pistol do we have here that we have shot for the series that requires?
Yeah, but if you think in
That
doctrine,
was specifically designed for you to use two hands. Let me put it that way. I might just have tiny hands and had to use my other hand.
well, I'm thinking of pistols, but they're only much later, like the Nambu Type 14 or something like that.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
I will say, for doctrine at the time, it's not that bad because realistically, you never want to accidentally go unsafe.
Right.
You can't with that. The way it's set up is it prevents the safety release / sear release problem that we saw, where flicking the safety caused the hammer to fall, which was really bad. Really
Right.
bad.
Yeah.
Especially because, again, your thumb is right there when it happens.
Not the best.
Yeah. But thankfully, it is one-handed off.
Yeah.
So once it's locked back, you just have to... Here, let me see it.
And they switched up the motion. It's no longer... It's the opposite in terms of the motion. So
Right.
push
So you
on,
rock
push up for
back to
on,
go
and rack back to go off.
ready.
Not my favorite.
Would you call this an improvement so far?
I mean, there is no second guessing whether or not this is on or off, but I don't think it's an improvement.
So you don't like the little hammer?
No.
You don't like the new safety?
I mean, I don't necessarily dislike the new hammer. I don't think I'm good at either for one-handing.
Okay, May size queen. Now, let's...
Okay, but also different cartridge.
Yes, that's the big one. 9mm Parabellum.
Yep.
That's only going to turn up in terms of recoil, though.
Yeah, I can't say I noticed too much of a difference. I mean, maybe there was a little bit less recoil. Maybe.
Theoretically, 9mm Parabellum should be softer shooting.
Yes.
If we looked at the footage, I bet you could see it. But again, I'm with you. That gun's so high over center.
Right,
that
it's kind of hard to...
all my time just trying to control the stupid gun one-handed.
Unfortunately.
So I guess, does this really change its position as a handgun compared to last episode?
Not really too much.
Maybe a little worse?
Technically, yes, with that safety.
Now, what about
And the
this
fact that
guy?
the cartridge is smaller. Oh, with the stock. Well, that's a different animal. That's not the same gun.
Okay. It's just stock attachment time.
That was really fast.
Was that your stock attachment music?
Yeah, I really thought that was going to take a little bit longer, so that was my stock attachment music.
You know, we edit the show. We could add our own music for stock attachment time. You don't have to make your own.
I mean, I feel like I did a good job.
Somehow the Maversations are turning
comment.
into the podcasts, and I don't know if that's good or bad.
Probably good,
No, definitely not.
or our podcasts aren't that weird.
Anyway, become a patron and find out what is in the future of this show. So,
He somewhat lets me off the leash, not entirely, but some.
we've attached our stocks. Would you say there's any difference between either of these two stocked? In terms of just ergonomics?
Probably not, just from how, if I'm remembering shooting with them, they didn't really feel that much different.
Okay.
Now, I know...
Now, hold on, before you start talking about shooting.
That's
go
what I
ahead
was getting
and
into.
let's get that on your shoulder and describe what it's like to have a stock C96 on your shoulder.
All right. Stock C96 on my shoulder. Dang, it fit that in tight. Like, that's a really good set for my cheek weld here up on the comb. And the sights are really clean. Like, this feels incredibly stable with two hands.
There's a lot of that.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a little bit of wiggle when the stock isn't perfectly set with it.
Yeah, the stock I have here was a modern commercial reproduction. And
So-
it was too tight when I got it, so I had to fit it to the gun. That's why it's got, it's actually got cutting fluid and stuff on it so that I could check where I was wearing. And I fit that thing as tightly as I possibly could, but by the time I was clearing the angles to get into the thing to fully lock home,
Right.
once it locked home, it would be loose again. left to right.
Yep.
And there's something about the geometries in there that by the time you get into that shape, the either the slight curvature of it or just the angle, the feet, I don't know what. But by the time you're in there, you cannot get a perfect left and right. So they all have a little bit of this.
Yeah.
Was that?
I don't think it's really. I don't think it does anything though. Really, it doesn't feel that bad when you're shooting it. You don't notice it.
When I first shouldered it, I thought it was going to ruin my shots. Like I really felt the twisting.
No, but look what you're doing there. That's what I was going to point out was the grip. This gun, when you go to grip it two-handed, you're supposed to grab here, but it feels way better to grip up here.
You're supposed to go up front, I think. There's a little bit of tail right here for your fingers.
I mean, I would expect it.
There's a ridge. That's where we're shooting.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of the revolver-style pistols where you have to stay behind.
Oh, yeah.
No. This is semi-automatic. You can go all the way up front, unlike a revolver. That's the one big advantage of this over a stock revolver. So, here. Yeah.
Keep your thumb down. You're going to get bit by that slide if you don't keep your thumb down.
I'm not going to get bit by it. It moves like a quarter of an inch or less.
It might happen.
It's not doing anything. All the action's back here. I'm fine. Yeah, it feels really wobbly, and then you start shooting, and you realize it just keeps coming back to center anyway. And it's not really wobbling on you. But when you started shooting, did it solve any of your problems with it as a pistol?
Oh boy, did it. So we were talking before about how the high bore axis was really causing recoil in this guy to climb. This stabilizes it incredibly so. It's the same deal with like the Luger we talked about in the Luger episodes previously, how adding a stock to that guy makes a world of a difference in terms of bringing the gun back down and stabilizing it.
Yeah, and the Luger is a lower bore axis pistol, but with this one, the shoulder eats up all of that problem spot, especially having the hand up front to be able to really control.
That double stabilize, you got 2 points or 3 points of stabilization because you've got your two hands and your shoulder. Perfect. It's
a little slick. I noticed that.
Yeah. This one's got a nice curve to it, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, this one does too, but it still wants to...
This is a better curve.
It's slippy. I think it's too slippy for a proper rifle cartridge.
Probably, yeah.
But for a pistol cartridge, it's excellent.
Not too bad, no.
Now, out of the two, did you notice any real difference between shooting 9mm or 7.63 in the carbine configuration?
Not really.
Yeah, especially not.
No, it's too unable to. There's too imperceivable. Like you really can't feel a difference at that rate. At that point.
As a pistol, I think I can feel the difference between 7.63 and 9mm.
Just barely.
No, I think I can. I think I can feel it. It's punchier, the 7.63.
I mean, it is, but I think it's barely perceivable.
I don't know. It feels snappier to me. But as these, I can't tell anything. No. It's all muddled. I will say that one is sighted for only 500 meters.
Yeah, so I can't go the full distance unlike that guy.
This one's sighted for 1,000.
Yeah, I can go all the distance.
Right. The big reason for that is this is a much flatter shooting cartridge that has been developed for long-range shooting as a pistol cartridge, whereas that is 9mm parabellum.
Yep.
So that is developed from the 7.65 parabellum in order to be a better man stopper at short range by having a higher diameter.
Which, I mean, not too bad. I don't think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for me to try to use this past the 500 point. I mean...
No, I can almost guarantee you're not going to get... There are probably more situations in which you would get over penetration with this than there are where you get under penetration with that.
Right, I think so too.
Because this is still not enough power to clear most obstacles. Like, it's not going to clear like a steel plate in the battlefield. It's not going to clear, I don't think it's going to clear pieces of wood with very much lethality afterwards. So you're really probably not getting a lot except for better performance at very long ranges, so in excess of 200 meters.
Yeah.
Which I think even at 200 meters, 300 meters, I'm really much rather have a rifle.
Same here.
So, yeah.
Not a bad pistol, though. No. And carbine.
Does the carbine aspect of this make the C96 overall go up, in your opinion, as a combat weapon?
So, here's the thing. If I'm in this situation, if I'm a dude and the pistol is my secondary weapon, right? So I've got obviously a primary that's, a rifle or a machine gun or something, and the pistol's my secondary. I'm not really going to need this stock because the situation in which I'm going to reach for my pistol is probably going to be emergent. I don't have the time to reload my rifle or reload the machine gun, and I need something right then and there.
Yeah, they're close at hand.
Right. I don't predict this being the scenario in which I'm going to want to have the stock, the extra weight on me, to then take the time and then to put it on there and then use the pistol
As a matter of
for
fact,
long range.
We talked about it. The stock forces you to have the hammer down and locked.
Yeah.
The stock is also very fragile. That's why this is a reproduction. That's why that's a commercial model stock that's been fitted onto a military pistol. That's not original to it. Because the originals probably broke up. They're very rare to find original stocks with military pistols. They're abused, they crack, they're terrible. So if you don't need the stock, this is a boat anchor.
Yeah, it really can be. But if I'm something like an officer where this is my weapon, yeah, I'm going to want that stock attachment with it because that's going to turn this into more than just an emergency or something I have to deal with. It's going to become actually further reliable. That's fantastic.
It gives you some carbine effect.
Yeah.
In addition to having a sidearm. So you're not going to be a shooter rifle. You can't just start carrying one around because everybody's going to be like, yo, dog, you're not supposed to have that rifle.
Right.
We're on shortages. Get that to the front line. Other than it's like a stocked Luger, I don't know that I could pick a better gun if I just had one gun and it was a pistol.
I mean, Smith & Wesson Russian #3.
Theoretically could be gotten with a stock. Although I don't know if the Russians did that or not. Now I got to remember our episode properly. But... still, that's
a revolver. So
that's only a 6-shot revolver, though.
Yeah.
And single action only. So no, that's not beating this.
Nope.
No, when we talk about stocked pistols, you're really looking at this, and you're looking at like the LP08 and the German Naval 1906. I think that's the right year. Boy, I hate saying guns when I'm anyway. The German Naval Luger, the German LP08. The stock lugs were present on the P08s, but that was just an artifact of them being produced after the LP08. So, yeah, and then this.
Yeah.
So, what I maybe prefer Luger to this, probably detachable magazine.
Yeah, way faster for loading.
But is stripper clip loading so bad that you would take a non-stocked pistol as your only weapon over this stock pistol that's stripper clip loading?
Well, it depends. We just gave the scenarios in which one's better than the other.
Yeah, but I'm talking about, your scenario was if you had another weapon. Or being a long arm. In this case, I'm saying you only get a pistol. Would you choose any non-stocked pistol over this stocked pistol?
No, I'd pick the stocked because then I at least have an option to upgrade said one for longer range options.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite photos I've seen from the war is a guy, some officer, I'd have to, I'm going off from memory now, but he has one that's sort of strapped around his neck just here. And it's just hanging there? Just hanging
you're
ready.
Your mic.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But it was hanging ready in the stock. And you're thinking, if I only had a handgun, being able to have it just sort of set across my chest ready for me to just grab and go?
Yeah, pretty good.
You could do a lot worse.
Yeah, not bad.
So that went from soft yes to potentially one of the best handguns you could have in a certain circumstance.
Really can put it up there. Just that single stock attachment, man. That's all it takes.
But the same feature, total garbage in the wrong circumstance.
Yeah.
War is weird.
It is.
And it's very hard. I think that alone should tell you how hard it can be to pick a handgun for an entire army. Unless you treat it as just a handgun with no other features.
It really can be.
Yeah.
And then on this one, unfortunately, parts interchangeability.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing. Although they were
another can of worms.
By the time of Germany, they were, by that one, interchangeable.
Yeah, that one, not
hand
so
fit at
much.
The end.
Yeah.
And it's all a scale issue as to whether or not they want to get into all that. But I don't know, I think it did a good job. But like we said last time, these are sort of the weirdest of the most available pistols.
Yeah, it's crazy how many there are.
If you were a wealthy person, could you see yourself being a C96 collector?
I mean, there are some unique little features, like as far as safety changeouts and hammer changeouts and things like that.
There's contracts with all sorts of engravings on them. There's all sorts of markings. I would love to, just for my own records, I'd like to get, if anybody has like an Ottoman contract one.
Oh, yeah, the Ottoman 93s. Yeah, those are beautiful.
They're 96s.
Oh, 96? Okay.
Yeah, but they have the Torah we talked about in the last episode.
Yeah.
I would love to get a hold of one for photography. I'd love to get a hold of, say, one of the Persian contracts for photography because both of them were present in the war. The Persians being used by the Germans as well.
Yeah.
The Austrians had their own contracts with Austrian marks. There's a lot of ways that you could collect the C96, and yet it's just rectangle gun, like another one of those weird, bizarre little designs. But I find them alluring. I think they're really cool.
Yeah, very unique.
I definitely love shooting them with a stock more than I love shooting them without.
1,000 times yes.
All right, well, I think that's guys wrapped up.
Pretty much.
Do you have any final words for the crowd?
No, I think I'm pretty good. Thoroughly enjoyed shooting these two. Happy to have them around for as long as we did.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, because of the mix-up on the other one, we actually have one that's around. We'll have to decide on what to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this is not the end of C96 history. We are not doing another episode soon, but one day we will get into the others like the Bolo and post-war models. But that's something for another time. I think you guys are probably C96'd out for now, and we'll get some other content next time around. See you later.
Night, guys. Update time, folks. Our numbers have been dragging lately, ever since YouTube admins came through and decided something like 10,000 of our subscribers were lies and took them off. So, we decided to pull the trigger on an idea we've kicked around for a while, really. Clips. A series that does quick reviews of facts or factoids taken from our more in-depth episodes. Some of you may have already seen the first one. If you haven't, give it a watch and leave us a comment on how you feel about it. I'll leave a link in the description below. Otherwise, thank you all for watching and have a good one.